The hidden secrets of the Book of John. Unlike any other religious text, the Gospel of John stands unique in human history. While other Gospels focus on what Jesus did, John reveals who Jesus is, from the cosmic beginning before time itself, through intimate encounters that transformed lives, to the ultimate victory over death that changed the course of human history forever. To bring you this comprehensive analysis, I've spent years studying ancient manuscripts, consulting with biblical scholars and examining historical records. This isn't just another Bible study. It's a journey through what many scholars consider the most mystical and profound of all the Gospels, written by the disciple who was closest to Jesus himself. By the end of this video, you'll understand why John's Gospel begins not with Jesus' birth, but with a cosmic declaration that echoes Genesis, the hidden meanings behind the 7 miraculous signs that only John records, the profound significance of Jesus' 7 I am statements that sent shockwaves through first-century Judaism, how John's unique perspective as the beloved disciple gives us an intimate window into Jesus' heart and mission. But most importantly, you'll discover why this 2,000-year-old text continues to transform lives today, offering answers to humanity's deepest questions about purpose, identity, and eternal destiny. In the beginning was the Word, and the Word was with God, and the Word was God, John 1:01. These opening words, penned by weathered hands that had both cast nets and touched the risen Christ, echo the majestic cadence of Genesis. But John's revelation goes deeper, pulling back the cosmic curtain to reveal an even more profound truth. Before the first light broke through darkness, before the waters separated from the land, before time itself began its measured march, the Word already was. To truly grasp the revolutionary nature of John's opening declaration, we must transport ourselves to the bustling streets of Ephesus in the 1st century, where this gospel was likely written. Here, amid the clash of cultures and philosophies, John's words would have resonated with profound significance across multiple worldviews. For Jewish readers, gathered in their synagogues and homes, the parallel to Genesis 1:01 would have been unmistakable, a deliberate echo of their sacred text. But there was more. Greek philosophers, who gathered in the shadow of Ephesus' magnificent temples to discuss the Logos, their concept of the divine reason giving order to the universe, would have found their intellectual foundations both affirmed and transformed. John takes their abstract principle of the Logos and reveals something far more profound. This cosmic force wasn't an impersonal principle, but a divine person who had walked the dusty roads of Palestine. The mystery deepens as John, his mind surely dwelling on the countless hours spent at Jesus' side, reveals that this word was not merely spoken, it was a person, eternal, divine, and in perfect unity with God. Picture, if you will, the vast expanse of nothingness before creation. In that timeless void, there existed a relationship of perfect love and communion between the Father and the Word. This wasn't the cold, distant deity of the philosophers, but a God of relationship, whose very nature was love. Through him all things were made, John continues, his words carrying the weight of eyewitness testimony. Without him nothing was made that has been made. John 1:03. Let that truth sink in for a moment. The hands that John had seen break bread for thousands, the hands he had watched heal the sick and raise the dead, the hands that would be pierced by nails, these were the same hands that hung the stars in space. The voice that had called him from his fishing boat, that had taught multitudes on hillsides, that would cry out in anguish on the cross, this was the same voice that spoke galaxies into existence. But John's revelation grows even more astounding as he recalls the light he had seen in his Master's eyes. In him was life, he declares, and that life was the light of all mankind, John 1:04. This word didn't remain distant, high above the chaos of a broken world. Instead, he stepped into it, bringing life and light to a humanity lost in darkness. Have you ever stood in complete darkness, where even the faintest glimmer of light feels like a lifeline? John had seen that darkness in the eyes of the sick, the outcast, the broken, and he had witnessed how the presence of Jesus had pierced that darkness with hope. Then comes the most extraordinary revelation, one that John had witnessed with his own eyes. The Word became flesh and made his dwelling among us. John 1:14. The Greek word for dwelling, skenuo, would have evoked powerful memories for Jewish readers, reminiscent of the tabernacle where God's presence dwelt among the Israelites in the wilderness. Just as the glory cloud had once guided their ancestors, now God himself had taken on human form to lead his people to salvation. Think about the magnitude of this truth. The infinite became finite. The all-powerful became vulnerable. The creator of the universe entered into his creation not as a ruler demanding allegiance, but as a servant offering grace. John, who had laid his head on Jesus' chest at the Last Supper, who had stood at the foot of the cross, who had run to the empty tomb, he witnessed this glory firsthand. We have seen his glory, he testifies, his words carrying the weight of intimate experience. The glory of the one and only Son, who came from the Father full of grace and truth. John 1:14. This glory wasn't a display of raw power meant to inspire fear. Instead, it was the perfect balance of grace and truth embodied in every word, action, and sacrifice of Jesus. Grace without truth can feel indulgent. Truth without grace can feel harsh. But in Jesus, both found their perfect expression. John had seen this balance in action when Jesus confronted the woman caught in adultery with truth, yet offered her grace, when he exposed the Pharisees' hypocrisy, yet wept over Jerusalem with compassion. In the Gospel of John, we encounter some of the most profound and transformative personal encounters with Jesus ever recorded. These aren't mere historical accounts, they're intimate portraits of lives forever changed by meeting the divine in human form. Let's begin with Nicodemus, a respected member of the Jewish Sanhedrin, whose nighttime conversation with Jesus would shake the foundations of his carefully constructed worldview. Picture the streets of Jerusalem, silent under a blanket of stars. Through the shadows moves a figure in expensive robes. Nicodemus, a man of learning and position, risks his reputation to seek answers from this controversial teacher from Nazareth. The night air is heavy with tension as Nicodemus approaches Jesus. "Rabbi," he begins diplomatically, "we know you are a teacher who has come from God." But Jesus, seeing past the formal greeting into Nicodemus's searching heart, cuts straight to the core. "Very truly I tell you, no one can see the kingdom of God unless they are born again." Imagine Nicodemus's bewilderment. Here was a man who had spent his life mastering the law, yet Jesus suggests his spiritual journey hasn't even begun. "How can someone be born when they are old?" he asks, his confusion evident. "Surely they cannot enter a second time into their mother's womb to be born." Jesus' response would echo through centuries. Flesh gives birth to flesh, but the Spirit gives birth to spirit. In the stillness of that Jerusalem night, a transformation begins in Nicodemus's heart. We see him later defending Jesus before the Sanhedrin, and finally, in an act of courage, helping to bury Jesus' body after the crucifixion. The scene shifts to the heat of midday at Jacob's well in Samaria. Here, Jesus orchestrates another extraordinary encounter with a woman whose life was defined by shame and social isolation. The disciples have gone to buy food, leaving Jesus alone when she approaches. Consider the radical nature of this meeting, a Jewish rabbi engaging with a Samaritan woman, crossing barriers of gender, ethnicity, and social status that had stood for centuries. "Give me a drink," Jesus requests, shocking her with his willingness to drink from her vessel. The conversation that follows is a masterpiece of spiritual guidance. Jesus gently leads her from the physical, "Sir, you have nothing to draw with, and the well is deep," to the spiritual, "Whoever drinks the water I give them will never thirst." As he reveals his knowledge of her 5 previous marriages, we see not condemnation but compassion. The moment of transformation comes when Jesus reveals himself as the Messiah. The woman's response is electric. Leaving her water jar behind, she runs to tell her village about the man who told me everything I ever did. Her testimony leads many Samaritans to faith, transforming not just one life but an entire community. Then there's the story of the man born blind, a narrative that unfolds like a courtroom drama. Jesus' opponents try to use his healing as evidence against him because it occurred on the Sabbath. But the healed man's testimony grows stronger with each interrogation. "One thing I do know, I was blind but now I see." These encounters reveal a pattern in Jesus' ministry. He meets people where they are but doesn't leave them there. To Nicodemus, the religious intellectual, he speaks of spiritual rebirth. To the Samaritan woman burdened by shame, he offers living water. To the blind man, he gives both physical sight and spiritual insight. As we see these lives transformed through personal encounters with Jesus, we begin to understand why John selected these particular stories. Each reveals a different facet of Jesus' identity and mission, leading us to the next revelation of who he truly is, expressed through his 7 profound I am statements that would shock his Jewish audience and reveal his divine nature. Amid his signs and miracles, Jesus speaks words that transcend time, revealing his divine identity with a phrase that echoes from the burning bush of Exodus, "I am." These declarations, recorded uniquely in John's Gospel, are more than metaphors. They are windows into the very nature of God himself. Picture the scene. A vast crowd has gathered on the shores of Galilee, their excitement still buzzing from witnessing Jesus feed thousands with just 5 loaves and 2 fish. The morning sun glints off the water as they search for him, hoping perhaps for another miraculous meal. But Jesus, perceiving their hearts, challenges them to look deeper. "You are looking for me not because you saw the signs I performed, but because you ate the loaves and had your fill." John chapter 6, verse 26. Then, in words that would have sent shockwaves through his Jewish audience, Jesus declares, "I am the bread of life. Whoever comes to me will never go hungry." John 6:35. The impact was immediate. His listeners would have instantly recalled how God had provided manna for their ancestors in the wilderness. But Jesus was claiming to be something far greater, not just a provider of physical bread, but the source of spiritual sustenance itself. The drama intensifies during the Festival of Tabernacles in Jerusalem. Picture the temple courts at nightfall, illuminated by massive golden lampstands that reminded the people of the pillar of fire that had guided their ancestors through the wilderness. Against this backdrop of dancing flames, Jesus' voice rings out, "I am the light of the world. Whoever follows me will never walk in darkness." John 8:12. The Pharisees, their faces flickering in the lamplight, bristle at this bold claim. They understand exactly what Jesus is saying. He isn't just claiming to be a teacher or prophet, but the very presence of God himself. As tensions mount, Jesus leads his listeners deeper into understanding his identity. In the countryside, where shepherds still tend their flocks as they did in David's time, he declares, "I am the gate. Whoever enters through me will be saved." John 10:9. Shortly after, he adds, "I am the good shepherd. The good shepherd lays down his life for the sheep." John 10:11. The good shepherd lays down his life for the sheep. These weren't just pastoral metaphors. They were claims to divinity that harkened back to Psalm 23, "The Lord is my shepherd." The power of these declarations reaches its climax in Bethany at the tomb of Lazarus. Martha, grief-stricken over her brother's death, meets Jesus on the road. Her words carry both faith and disappointment. "Lord, if you had been here, my brother would not have died." John 11:21. Jesus' response transcends all expectations. "I am the resurrection and the life. The one who believes in me will live, even though they die." John 11:25. Moments later, he would prove these words by calling Lazarus from the grave. In the intimate setting of the Last Supper, as shadows of the cross loom near, Jesus offers his disciples 2 final "I am" declarations. "I am the way, the truth, and the life." John 14:6, he assures them, followed by, "I am the true vine." John 15, verses 1. These words, spoken on the eve of his death, would take on even deeper meaning after his resurrection. Each "I am" declaration builds upon the others, creating a complete picture of Jesus' divine identity and mission. They weren't just theological statements. They were invitations to experience the fullness of life that only he could provide. Just as God had revealed himself to Moses as "I am who I am," Exodus 3:14, Jesus was revealing himself as the same divine presence now made accessible in human form. These profound declarations would soon be tested in the crucible of conflict, as opposition to Jesus' claims reached its breaking point. The religious authorities understood exactly what he was claiming: equality with God himself. As we follow the story to its climax, we'll see how these "I am" statements led inevitably to the cross, where the bread of life would be broken, the light of the world would pierce the darkness of death, and the Good Shepherd would lay down his life for his sheep. The Gospel of John reaches its emotional crescendo in the account of Jesus' crucifixion. Every step, every word, and every action reveals a love so profound that it transcends human understanding. This is not just the story of a death, it is the ultimate demonstration of selfless, sacrificial love that reaches beyond time and space to embrace all of humanity. The journey to the cross begins not with defiance, but with surrender. In the Garden of Gethsemane, under the ancient olive trees that had witnessed centuries of prayers, Jesus faces his destiny. John, who had fallen asleep during Jesus' anguished prayer, now watches with growing dread as torchlight breaks through the darkness. Judas approaches with soldiers and officials from the chief priests and Pharisees, their weapons glinting in the flickering light. What happens next reveals Jesus' divine authority even in his apparent defeat. When he speaks the words, "I am he," the armed crowd draws back and falls to the ground, a powerful reminder that his surrender is voluntary. He who could command legions of angels chooses the path of sacrifice. The scene shifts to the Roman governor's palace, where Pilate, caught between political expedience and moral unease, questions Jesus. "Are you the king of the Jews?" he asks, his voice a mixture of curiosity and contempt. Jesus' response reveals a kingdom far greater than Rome could imagine. "My kingdom is not of this world." These words, recorded by John, challenge every earthly power structure and redefine the nature of true authority. Despite finding no fault in him, Pilate succumbs to the crowd's mounting pressure. The sentence is handed down and the path of suffering begins. Jesus is flogged, the leather whip embedded with metal and bone tearing into his flesh. Roman soldiers, perhaps trying to distance themselves from the horror of their actions through mockery, crown him with thorns. "Hail, King of the Jews," they jeer, their words dripping with contempt. The cross, heavy with the weight of wood and destiny, is laid upon his shoulders. The journey to Golgotha, the place of the skull, begins. Each step is a testament to his endurance, not just of physical agony, but of the spiritual burden he carries, the sins of the world pressing down upon him as he stumbles along the Via Dolorosa. At the foot of the cross stands a small group of faithful followers, including Mary, Jesus' mother, and John himself. Their presence in this moment of apparent defeat speaks to a love stronger than fear. Even in his agony, Jesus' concern extends to others. Looking down at his mother and John, he ensures Mary's future care. "Woman, here is your son," and to John, "Here is your mother." This tender act amidst unimaginable pain reflects the depth of his compassion. The sky darkens unnaturally, as if creation itself cannot bear to witness what unfolds. Jesus' words from the cross, carefully recorded by John, reveal the depth of his suffering and the completion of his mission. "I thirst," a cry that speaks to both physical agony and spiritual longing. Then, with divine authority, even in death, it is finished. The Greek word used here, tetelestai, was written on business documents or receipts to indicate a debt fully paid. With this declaration, Jesus announces that the debt of sin has been canceled, the chasm between God and humanity bridged. Blood and water flow from his pierced side, a detail John specifically notes as eyewitness testimony. This seemingly small detail carries profound theological significance, the water symbolizing cleansing, the blood representing atonement. Together they point to the complete nature of salvation secured through his sacrifice. But the cross is not the end of the story. Even as darkness seems to triumph, something unprecedented is stirring in the realm of death. The grave clothes that wrapped his broken body will soon lie empty. and a morning unlike any other in human history is about to dawn. The story of resurrection reaches its triumphant climax in the early hours of a Jerusalem morning, as darkness gives way to the first glimmers of dawn. The air still carries the heavy scent of burial spices and the weight of profound grief. The city sleeps, unaware that the greatest miracle in human history is about to unfold. Mary Magdalene, her heart heavy with sorrow, makes her way through the quiet streets toward Jesus' tomb. Her footsteps echo against the stone pavements as she carries fresh spices, one final act of love for her crucified Lord. The memories of his brutal death are still fresh in her mind, the horror of the cross, the sound of the hammer driving nails, the final breath he drew. These thoughts accompany her like shadows in the pre-dawn darkness. But as she approaches the garden tomb, something seems wrong. The massive stone, which had required several strong men to roll into place, has been moved. The tomb stands open, like a mouth gaping in surprise. Mary's heart begins to race. In panic, she runs to find Peter and John, her voice trembling as she delivers the news. "They have taken the Lord out of the tomb, and we don't know where they have put him." John 20:02. The two disciples immediately sprint toward the tomb. John, younger and faster, arrives first, but hesitates at the entrance. Peter, ever impulsive, brushes past him and strides directly inside. What they discover defies explanation. The burial cloths lie neatly folded, not scattered as they would be if grave robbers had struck. The face cloth that had covered Jesus' head is rolled up by itself, separate from the linen wrappings. This is no scene of chaos or theft. It speaks of purpose, of deliberate action, but it's what they don't find that changes everything. The body of Jesus is gone. The scene shifts back to Mary, who has returned to the tomb. Now alone, she stands weeping, her tears falling onto the rocky ground where her Lord had lain. Bending down to peer into the tomb one more time, she sees something extraordinary. Two angels in white, seated where Jesus' body had been, one at the head and the other at the foot. "Woman, why are you crying?" they ask. Through her tears, she responds, "They have taken my Lord away, and I don't know where they have put him." John 20:13. Then comes the moment that transforms not just Mary's life, but all of human history. Turning around, she sees someone standing there, a figure she assumes is the gardener. Through tear-blurred eyes, she hears him ask, "Woman, why are you crying? Who is it you are looking for?" John 20:15. Then he speaks just one word. In that moment, as her name falls from his lips, recognition floods her soul. It's the same voice that had once cast 7 demons from her, the voice that had taught her about God's kingdom, the voice she thought she would never hear again. "Rabboni!" she cries out, reaching for him. The story continues with Jesus appearing to his disciples, who are hiding behind locked doors, paralyzed by fear of the Jewish authorities. Suddenly, Jesus stands among them, showing them his wounds, tangible proof that the crucified one is now the risen one. A week later, he appears again, this time especially for Thomas, who had doubted. The skeptical disciple falls to his knees, declaring, "My Lord and my God," John 20:28. But perhaps the most poignant resurrection encounter comes at dawn by the Sea of Galilee. Peter, who had denied Jesus 3 times, is fishing with some other disciples. A figure calls from the shore, telling them to cast their nets on the right side of the boat. When they do, the nets fill with fish, an echo of their first calling. John realizes first, it is the Lord. John 21:7. Peter, in characteristic fashion, jumps into the water and swims to shore. There, over a breakfast of bread and fish, Jesus gently restores his fallen disciple. 3 times he asks, "Do you love me?" matching Peter's 3 denials with 3 opportunities to affirm his love. These resurrection appearances aren't just stories of wonder, they're encounters that transform broken people into bold witnesses. The disciples who had fled in fear become fearless proclaimers of the gospel. Mary's grief turns to joy as she becomes the first evangelist of the resurrection. Thomas's doubt gives way to the highest confession of Jesus' deity in John's Gospel. As we conclude our journey through the Gospel of John, we find ourselves facing the same profound question that confronted its first readers. What will you do with this Jesus? the Word who existed before time, who stepped into history, who died for our sins, and who rose victorious over death. He stands today offering the same invitation he offered to Mary, Peter, Thomas, and countless others throughout history. This isn't just ancient history we've explored together. The same Jesus who turned water into wine still transforms lives today. The one who opened blind eyes still helps us see truth. The shepherd who laid down his life still seeks his lost sheep. The vine that gives life still offers connection to divine purpose. If John's account is true, and remember he stakes his entire testimony on being an eyewitness to these events, then we're confronted with the most important decision any human being can make. Will you, like Thomas, move from doubt to declaration? Will you, like Peter, allow past failures to be transformed into future purpose? Will you, like Mary, hear him call your name and respond with complete devotion? I invite you to share your thoughts in the comments below. What part of John's Gospel resonates most deeply with you? Perhaps you've experienced your own transformation story. We'd love to hear it. Or maybe you're wrestling with questions about faith and doubt. This community is here to engage in meaningful dialogue about these eternal truths. If you found value in this exploration of John's Gospel, please consider subscribing to our channel. Each week we dive deep into the profound truths of Scripture, uncovering the layers of meaning that have transformed lives for 2 millennia. Hit that notification bell to ensure you don't miss our next biblical discovery. For those seeking to go deeper, we've created a special study guide that accompanies this video. You'll find the link in the description below. It's designed to help you explore these truths personally and perhaps share them with others who are seeking. Remember, John wrote his Gospel that you may believe that Jesus is the Messiah, the Son of God, and that by believing you may have life in his name. John 20:31, the question isn't whether he is calling, he is. The question is, how will you respond? Thank you for joining me on this incredible journey through the most profound gospel ever written. Until next time, may you experience the transforming power of the Word who became flesh and dwelt among us.